Hello, I'm Alan Shavitz, board member and webmaster of Marin Coalition. Before we get started on the program, a few housekeeping items. This is a Zoom webinar. For those of you who have attended our webinars before, you're aware of how it works. For those of you who are new, you're basically like an audience in an auditorium. Your video and audio are not functioning. However, you will be able to submit questions or comments at any time, starting right now, using the Q&A icon on your screen. Click on that and you can type in your question or comment. It'll be dealt with during the question and answer portion of the program. There's also a closed caption CC icon, which allows you to turn on or off closed captioning, use as you see fit. Both of these icons may be a little difficult to find on a small screen like a smart pad or a smartphone, but they're there somewhere. This program is being recorded and will be available on our website within a day or two. Without further ado now, I turn you over to our host, Scott Pinsky.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Marin Coalition and our program, Marin Water Roadmap for Water Supply Resiliency. I am the chair of the Marin Coalition, Scott Pinsky, and we thank you for joining us for this program. For those tuning in for the first time, Marin Coalition is a community-based nonprofit that presents an ongoing forum of programs on topics concerning public affairs here in the community. We invite you to visit our website, marincoalition.org, to learn more. And we also, as Alan said, have our prior programs recorded on the archive page, and you can watch those at any time. This program will be recorded as well and will be available probably by the end of today or tomorrow. The next event that we have planned is not finalized yet. We are hoping to do a program in May as a follow-up on our last program concerning policing in Marin. We hope to have some representatives from the Marin community to discuss that topic, but we don't have a date yet. So we'll send out information as soon as we have that, and hopefully we'll be able to present that to you in the next month or so. Today's guests, we have Monty Schmidt, Marin Water Board President, Jed Smith, a member of the Marin Water Board of Directors, and Paul Cellier, Director of Water Resources for Marin Water. Our topic is a large one. Marin Water is the larger of two water supply agencies in the county, and it provides water service to some 191,000 people in central and southern Marin. Recent severe drought conditions have, of course, intensified the agency's focus on strengthening the reliability of its water supply. And starting in February of last year, the district initiated a strategic water supply assessment to develop a plan to create a drought-resistant water supply. The assessment evaluated the district's current baseline water supply in the context of climate change-driven droughts, and it analyzed potential water management alternatives that could improve the district's long-term water supply resiliency. This year-long effort helped the agency to prioritize which options to pursue as part of a new roadmap that includes both near and long-term actions to increase water availability for the county. So today we'll get to hear from agency representatives about what this new roadmap entails, the timeline for getting it done, and the current proposed rate increases that will help fund the first 4 years of its implementation. Our 3 guests are Monty Schmidt. He was elected to serve as the Marin Water Division II Director beginning in December of 2020. He also currently serves as the board president. Monty is a water resources scientist and a senior project director with the Nature Conservancy's water program in San Francisco. He holds a Master of Science degree in watershed management from Humboldt State University. Next, we have Jed Smith. He began his term as Division IV Water Board Director in December of 2022. Welcome to the board. For over 3 decades, he's been an entrepreneur, executive, CEO, director, board chair, and investor. His work experience prioritizes a healthy planet and expanding opportunities for underserved communities. Jed has an MBA from Harvard Business School. And our third presenter is Paul Cellier. He has worked for MMWD for 21 years, previously served as the district's water operations director before transitioning to director of water resources in 2022. Paul led the district's strategic water supply assessment, working closely with the district's project consultant through the year-long effort. He has a degree in chemical engineering from UC Berkeley. And without further ado, I'm pleased to present our 3 panelists. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. I'm Paul Cellier. I'm the Director of Water Resources with Marin Municipal. Thanks, Scott, for the introductions. And just introduce again, Monty Schmidt, our Board President, and Jed Smith, the Director here at Marin Municipal. Today we have a presentation to share with you, and it'll take us a good while to get through the presentation, maybe 30 to 40 minutes. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to engage with you this morning and share this information. My goal is to summarize about 12 months worth of work in 30 minutes or so around this strategic water supply assessment that we've been doing over the past year. And in doing so, explain the process and how we arrived at the roadmap for water supply resiliency. And I'd like to start that with just a very brief overview of Marin Municipal Water District, just to make sure everyone understands. So we'll touch on that overview, and then we'll get into the assessment update and looking at the strategies and the roadmap itself. And then we'll touch at the end on sort of next steps. So Marin Municipal Water District, you may or may not know, is state's first municipal. It was established in 1912 as Special District Number 1 under the Municipal Act. We have about 147 square mile service area that covers mostly sort of central and southern Marin up to about Novato. In that area, there are approximately 191,000 people, and I think we're at about 60,000 service connections. We serve something like 8 billion gallons of water every year to those customers. And as a public agency, we're not here to make profits. We charge our customers essentially the cost of providing that clean, reliable, high quality drinking water that we're all so used to here in Marin. Our water comes, again, uniquely somewhat from a local source in majority. About 75% of our water comes from our Marin reservoirs, 5 of which are located on Mount Tam, and 2 of which are in West Marin. Our combined total storage is about 80,000 acre feet. And unless you spend a lot of time dealing with acre feet, it's kind of a tough quantity. So I'll put it in gallons for us. That's somewhere in the region of 26 billion gallons of storage when we're full. If you think of that in terms of milk jugs, right, that's about the size of a gallon. It's a lot of water, but at the same time, we need to remember that water comes from precipitation, and precipitation we know is affected by climate change. And that's why we've spent the last 12 months or so looking at water supply resiliency. The other component of our water supply, very importantly, is 25% of that water, just on average, comes from Sonoma County and the Russian River. So looking at the strategic water supply assessment, then the key elements that we looked at over the course of the year, the first three really are about understanding our current risks and establishing the goals for the project. And you can see that in those bullets. Obviously, the water supply strategy and goals was an important thing to establish at the outset. We built a decision support model to describe our water system so that we can then use that model to understand how it would change if we added supplies to it or changed conditions. We also then looked at a number of supply and demand scenarios, and we'll talk a little bit about that step next. We spent a fair amount of time considering all the different water supply alternatives, and we'll touch on those as well. And then those alternatives, of course, were evaluated and then combined into strategies, and the strategies then into the ultimate sort of integrated roadmap. So we used scenarios to help us define or capture, I should say, uncertainty that's not included within our kind of control. And by that, I mean, there are a range of plausible futures that could exist. And so we tried to capture what that range of plausible futures could be through scenarios, and things like, you know, in scenario 4, an abrupt disruption wildfire event, for example. Or it could be that the next 60 years or so, we just are kind of going along at the same way that we always have. So sort of current trends. And then we looked at short and severe drought. And then we looked at what if there was a drought that was longer than sort of historic records. And so to do that, we needed to understand water supply. And that water supply is kind of determined by the hydroclimate. So we spent a fair amount of time and effort going through the historical records that we have here at the district, going back about 140 or so years, but also looking forward through global climate change models and understanding how historical data might change through the lens of those climate models. We also went further back than just the written record, looking at paleoclimate reconstructions to understand in the very distant past what was the climate like in this region. And then we sort of put our heads together and tried to understand if we could come up with a hypothetical or synthetic drought that might be worse than anything we saw in the historical record, and maybe even more severe than anything that was evident in the paleo record. And so that was how we looked at water supply. And then in terms of water demand, of course, we know recent trends and population growth, and then looking at the effects of water conservation and water use efficiency and how those might be brought to bear. It turns out for us that scenario number 2, the short and severe drought, was sort of the controlling condition for us to look at in terms of our water supply and how it might fare. And that drought was essentially, so this table is just a description of the different scenarios and sort of the conditions and assumptions that were included in each of those. And I won't go through all of that. I think the important thing is that scenario 2 is essentially the controlling scenario for us. That is, as it says here, in terms of the hydroclimate, that would be a 2020, and followed by 1976 and 1977. So 2 of the droughts of record back to back. And when we look at our existing water supply using that model that we built to help us understand how it would perform under something like this synthetic drought, you can see in the green line here, this is as a water district, if I just step back for a minute, we of course measure our bank account in terms of how much water we have in storage. So this chart in front of us is a representation of reservoir storage levels, combined storage levels. And as a water agency, we have operational limits that we set in order to establish a target for a level in the reservoir that we wouldn't feel comfortable going below at the conclusion of a 4-year drought. And that number is set at around 30,000 acre feet. So then looking at this trace, which is goes out 20 or so years from 2022, and it's again just the model playing the scenario out, and you can see out in 2040 or so, and this dip, this challenge in terms of water supply could occur anywhere on this time frame. We've chosen here this representation because it occurs at the point where our population is highest, and so water demand overall will be higher. So again, it's another stress test feature. And as you can see from the green line, when the reservoir levels start going down, and 4 years of drought, you can see that we arrive well below the storage operational limits of around 30,000 acre feet or so. And in fact, we get to about 10,000 acre feet of water in the reservoir system, and that's getting pretty close to a very uncertain zone for us to be able to continue delivering water to our customers. So then that's what would happen if we did nothing to our water supply. We just continued today. But we know, and we took a look at different water management alternatives in sort of 6 general categories, from water conservation to looking to the north at Sonoma and understanding what are the other things we could be doing there to bring more water to Marin. Also looking at storage solutions for water, and then again, bay interties and purchasing water. We also considered desalination and, of course, water reuse, and we'll touch on some of these. But importantly, water conservation is at the top of our list. Our water efficiency program has been a long-standing program here at Marin Water, and we're very proud of it. It is one of our best solutions and has served us well over the years. Overall, the water efficiency program has sort of 3 main elements to it. One of which is the components of water conservation that are contained within the strategic water supply assessment. And that's a subset of the overall water efficiency program. That water efficiency program is also augmented by drought response actions, such as we may have seen various messaging from the district going out over 2021 and 2020 in terms of requests for saving water that we've made to our customers over that period of time. Overall, the water efficiency master plan will help us take a out-of-the-box view of our conservation plan and efforts, and we're going to be engaging through that process this year. Some detail on what's included in the strategic water supply assessment includes a range of incentive programs and activities that our customers can participate in. And this table shows some unit costs in terms of how much dollars per acre foot in terms of the cost of the program and the water savings. And then the far right column shows what that cumulative water savings would be over the planning period. And then at the bottom, you can see sort of an average cost of that water for the planning period. And I would note that what's included here, what's included in this table, these are really the quantifiable. So water use efficiency, water conservation has sort of 2 components to it. One is a behavioral component. That is the changes that we all make with how long we water, what plants we put in, that sort of a thing. And those can be difficult to quantify in terms of how much water we're going to be able to save. However, we are able to quantify, and that's what's included on this table as part of the strategic water supply assessment. For example, how much non-functional turf we might be able to convert over a period of time. And so that's the piece of conservation, the conservation element that's included in the strategic water supply element. Conservation, of course, is much more than just what's included in the strategic water supply element. And as I mentioned, there's a range of incentive programs that target both indoor and outdoor water use efficiencies. The district will review landscape plans. There are education programs for schools. There are classes going on at College of Marin for homeowners, contractors, and of course, a series of local community events at which we're able to connect with our customers. And of course, we also have a longstanding program of Marin Master Gardeners here and working with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. And the district does also have, as part of our conservation program, a comprehensive list of water waste prohibitions. And there's a number of customer resources that you can take advantage of beyond even just the incentives offered in the inset box here. So that's just a quick peek into water conservation, which we regard as one of our top prospects. So all of the projects, water management alternatives, clearly have a great deal of information that I could go into on each one of them, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end on all of them. But in the interest of time, I think it's best if we just sort of understand those in general terms in the categories that we talked about. All of them have been put through an evaluation criteria in terms of these various parameters here. Yield, cost, and timing being important, but as are all of these on here. So as I say, all of the alternatives were evaluated. And I think if all of us were to spend time and try to put our own numbers in next to each of these options, we probably all have different numbers. And so it's not about necessarily adding up the numbers across from each row and coming up with whichever one has the best score. But these are sort of to help us qualitatively think through some of the options. For example, in this chart, basically a low score is good. So green in this case represents a good option or a good score in terms of the different criteria. So you might look at movable spill gates, for example, and see that there's only one red box on there, and that's in terms of yield. And so this is kind of, you would look at that and say, well, that's a really interesting project. And it is, and it will be considered as part of our local storage options going forward. The reason it's scored low in maybe one of the most important categories is in terms of yield. Because after all, the main focus of what we're trying to accomplish here is water supply resiliency. So I won't go through all of these, but again, this chart, and we'll provide the slides so that the Marin Coalition has them available for you to look at after the fact, and I welcome you to reach out to me or other members of staff at Marin Municipal, and we can help answer any questions you've got. Okay, so we understand what the impacts of drought were to our storage. We spent time and developed a number of potential water management alternatives to solve that deficit. And now the next step is to think about other strategies that we could pull together for water supply that will resolve that deficit. And so we developed three potential strategies, one just in general terms, a Marin Sonoma focus, a desalination focus, and a Bay Intertie focus. And so we took those and we developed a number of sort of projects that fall into those categories. And so what you see here is a strategy-based roadmap around Marin Sonoma options. And let me just go through this because it is a fairly complex diagram. We've established a number of what we call no regret option projects that are common to all strategy and roadmaps. And those are represented here in the sort of light green or light green hash. And, it's electrify Sulahuli, Phoenix and Bontempi connection, forecasting stream release, the operational strategy for bringing in supplemental water from Sonoma, and then, of course, our water conservation program. And where the these sort of shaded areas begin is about where, in terms of timing, we think these projects will kick in for us. So if we were looking at the Sulahuli and the Phoenix to Bontempi projects, we would say those are sometime in 2024 that we would be expecting those to start providing water for us. Next to some of the bullets, you'll see a capital cost. And you'll note here, right, water conservation, it says 0. Well, if it's one of your most important programs, how come you're not spending any money on it? Well, this is only reflecting capital dollars. In fact, our water conservation program is funded out of our operations budget, and we'll see later on a slide of what the allocation for budget is for that. Okay, so green are our no regrets options, and we'll see those on all of the strategy focused roadmaps. So on this roadmap, Marin Sonoma, we're looking in sort of the gold bullet here, dedicated conveyance to storage. And that means to either a Marin reservoir or potentially to groundwater storage in the Sonoma Santa Rosa Plain. So bringing in more water from Sonoma into Marin or accessible to Marin. And then the other is component of that is improving the conveyance of Sonoma water by eliminating some bottlenecks. Coupled with bringing in water from Sonoma, we're looking at, I mentioned storage in a regional groundwater bank of some of that Sonoma water. So that's a potential storage there. We're also looking at potentially increasing local storage at Kent, Nicasio, or Sulahuli. And so combining these together, we can see that starting sometime, in 2027 or thereabouts, there's a possibility for some increased conveyance from to storage from Sonoma. And so generally speaking, I would say we have the green options. These are early low regret options, and they occur generally as the first contributions to water supply. Then we look in the midterm, which is sort of the gold bullets, and then in the blue, sort of longer term. This strategy has a potential of between 12, if all of these projects prove viable, between 12 and 17,000 acre feet of new supply for the district, which would address, if you recall, the deficit that was shown on that chart of reservoir storage that I went through, was about 8,500 acre feet or so. So then we looked at a desalination focus. Again, you see common to all of these is the low regrets options in green. The desalination focus has two main elements. One is consideration of a Petaluma brackish desalination plant, which would take advantage of brackish groundwater near the Petaluma River. And then a longer term option in terms of a Marin regional desalination plant. And so combining all of these low regret options and the desalination options, you're looking at a potential new water supply of around 15,000 acre feet or so. And then the last strategy we looked at was the Bay interties. Again, the green options are common to all. And as we look at the Bay intertie here, which is essentially water purchases from the Sacramento Valley and conveying that water through an East Bay mud intertie, so a pipeline across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. We feel this option could bring us up to 10,000 acre feet of new water supply. So looking at the strategies and, how do they perform against the deficits or the deficit that we identified? So these are the same sort of charts that you saw previously in terms of total reservoir storage. And the black line is the baseline that we looked at before, where it comes down to just below 10,000 acre feet. So that's a baseline where we do nothing in terms of new supply. And we can look in the inset table over here, and we can see that if we do nothing, we're going to be heading into drought restrictions over this period of time, maybe up to 7 times. And of those 7 times, 6 of them were going to be in stage 2 mandatory conservation, and 4 of the 7 times were going to be as far down as stage 3 restrictions in terms of water use prohibitions. If we were then to jump to the other side of the table and look at the intertie for the same sort of 4-year drought, the intertie does reduce the number of stage restrictions, down to 6, but it's not a great, it's just reducing it by 1. And then we would enter stage 2 4 times and stage 3 twice. So there is some improvement there. Where we do see some real improvement is in the Marin Sonoma options, where we're now cutting the number of years of restriction or events that we need to have restrictions in place down to 3. And then when we only one of those 3 times would be asking for stage 3 water use restrictions. And you can see the column here for the desal as an improvement, but it's not as favorable as the Marin Sonoma options. So sort of trying to look at all of these together and compare them. We can compare across yields. Probably the 2 most likely that are going to meet our performance needs are going to be the Marin Sonoma and the desalination strategies. The Bay Intertie strategy, even though it said we think we might be able to get 10,000 acre-feet, we believe it's going to be a very challenging strategy to execute the purchase and transfer of that water. So then we can compare options by cost, and you can see that the Marin Sonoma is more favorable than desalination. And then we can start looking in terms of annual cost to operate those projects, and then indeed the capital costs. And this is where the challenge comes with something like desalination in terms of the annual and capital costs for these. So as we look more qualitatively in terms of the reliability ratings, the one weakness perhaps in the Marin Sonoma options is that they're not 100% bulletproof under all, I'm talking about the most extreme drought conditions, more extreme than we've obviously considered here. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is a pretty extreme scenario that we're considering. So, so it's just an acknowledgement that desalination would provide the highest reliability of all of the water supply strategies that we looked at. In terms of environmental rating, again, the Marin Sonoma option wins out over both desalination and Bay Intertie. And then you can see the ratings here on some of these other categories. Permitting and legal risks, of course, desalination would be very challenging. Similarly, for social ratings, there's a lot of opinions on desalination and preferences for other work to be done. So this is just another table sort of summarizing some of the benefits and just acknowledging some of the challenges that I've talked about. So in the Marin Sonoma, it's just, a couple things that it's not completely drought resistant. There is this perception that there's competition for water from the Russian River. We're targeting with all of these projects on the Marin Sonoma access to water during the winter time. That's between the October and May months, when stream flows in the Russian River are above minimum in-stream flow requirements. So that's why we say that's perceived. And then with desalination, it's drought resistant and it achieves the performance goals. It diversifies our supplies. So there are some positives. There are, of course, corresponding challenges and risks associated with it, not the least of which is the complex permitting and environmental considerations, the high capital and operating costs, the high energy use and significant increase in carbon footprint, and the fact that the droughts don't occur all the time. So the demand for this water could be intermittent, and desalination is not well suited to intermittent operations. In terms of the Bay Intertie, it is flexible in terms of we can decide when to purchase water. It does give us some level of diversification in our portfolio. And it, of course, would provide a connection to the greater Bay Area, which just provides us additional opportunities for collaboration with other agencies. Yet, it is a complex process, contracting and agreements to coordinate with up to 6 different agencies in order to make sure the water arrives here in Marin. And then during the droughts, particularly the last one, which was very severe, there was extreme competition for water and against some very big players in that market. So there's some uncertainty as to the access to transfer water. And then one of our key partners in this coordination effort would be the East Bay Municipal Utility District, and their board has adopted a series of principles governing the use of their system to transfer water through, which make it very challenging for us. And then finally, that option really only partially achieves our performance goals. Okay, so what do we do with the strategy information? Well, we hope to learn from it and blend components from one strategy into a common integrated roadmap. And that's what we were able to do. The main elements of the integrated strategy, water conservation and flexible drought measures. And so we're looking at expanding our conservation plan, and I talked a little bit about that. And we want to continue to have available strong water shortage contingency plan and measures so that when drought does show up, we're able to act quickly. We recognize that there are improvements in our operation that we can make to improve our water supply. And we talked about some of these are the low regrets projects. And there's some information, I think, towards the end of the presentation that describe what some of these options are. So electrifying Sulawesi Pump Station. Sulawesi is a reservoir out in West Marin that were we to try to use it today, we need to mobilize large generators to operate the pumps out there. And those pumps, they're not small, they're 2 800 horsepower pumps. And that sort of restricts our use of Sulawesi Reservoir. So by bringing line power to the reservoir, we'll be able to operate it whenever we need to. And then connecting Phoenix Lake to Bontempi Reservoir will perhaps allow us to capture some of the spill from Phoenix Lake that we observed in the most recent rains. And then there are some strategic implementation that we could, and we did apply for a temporary urgency change. This is the change to the release requirements around releases from Kent Reservoir, although the rains arrived before we needed to really deploy these. They are a tool in the bag. And then we're taking a look at forecasting and stream release automation, which hopefully will allow us to match the stream release requirements a little more closely than we currently do. Maximizing the use of Sonoma water supplies, there's a step by which we can look at optimizing the strategy of how we take water from Sonoma. And it's not just simply as saying, well, buy as much as you can. Well, if we were to buy just as much as we could from Sonoma, over the course of the summer, for example, and then it rained cats and dogs over the winter, then we've just sort of wasted that money. I don't know that it will be possible for us to come up with a perfect algorithm that everything balances perfectly and we can truly optimize it, but we should be able to look at that and over the period of 10 or 20 years, understand what the right amount of water for us to be taking from Sonoma is to sort of minimize our risk and exposure to droughts. And then as we talked about with the Sonoma water supplies, we'll be developing dedicated conveyance to storage concepts and then improving existing conveyance to Marin Water. Increasing local storage, potentially up to 20,000 acre-feet of storage, but also looking at smaller improvements because we're not certain as to whether the larger improvements would be viable. So there could be a range of potential storage solutions looked at for local storage. And then developing new supplies, including Petaluma brackish, and looking at expanding recycled water where we can bring grants in to drive that cost down to a more comparable number with other elements in the roadmap. And then we're very interested to learn more, and I understand Sonoma are starting to kick off some work around the regional groundwater banking. So looking at this information in a graphical way, as we did with the strategy roadmaps, this is the integrated roadmap that contains all of the low regrets or early actions, and then kind of combines them with conveyance to storage, looking at increasing storage, exploring desalination in terms of petaluma brackish desalination, looking at that in terms of feasibility, and then kind of keeping an eye on the costs of desalination around California, just generally, as it relates to something that Marin may want to think about years in the future. So keeping tabs on desalination across California. And then similarly, I mentioned recycled water. We're very interested to expand recycled water in a way that's cost effective for our customers. And so we're hoping to pursue grant funding to bring those costs down. And our water conservation program is ever present and will be looked at and adapted and worked on over the years to see what we can do to improve that. So this roadmap allows us to bring in somewhere between 12 and up to 20,000 acre feet of new water should we need it. And we're pursuing many of these projects in parallel. And it's important that we do that because we don't know which of these projects and when we're going to run into a roadblock. And so it may be that some of these projects, conveyance, for example, may come out ahead of, either petaluma brackish desalination or even, increasing storage. So we're going to take a look at moving these forward in parallel to the extent that we can. And then as soon as we understand what some of the potential challenges might be in terms of allowing us to prioritize our next steps. So these couple slides, and I won't go through all of these right now, but they're there for your reference. And as I say, this will be available on the website, and they just talk about what some of the projects are in a little bit more detail so you can understand what they are. I think there's 2 or 3 of these slides. So then as we look at the integrated strategy, and we've got the other strategies down below just for reference, but the integrated strategy does have a high potential yield. So it checks off in terms of covering our deficits, even if, our deficits were low. So if the drought and water supply conditions were worse than we had thought. And then it does build on existing infrastructure. So it's not like we were having to create entirely new infrastructure. There is an element to it that there's a sort of symbiosis in that it integrates both supply and storage. And it builds on our existing regional partnerships north. It does increase our hydrologic diversification somewhat. If you think of Marin's watershed as some 40 square miles or thereabouts, and compare that to the Russian River watershed, which is around 1,500 square miles. So the odds, for us to have a atmospheric river hit our small 40 square mile watershed, it's probably better odds that atmospheric event would cross over the Russian River watershed more so than ours. And within each of the project types that I've described, there are multiple options for conveyance and storage. And finally, it does include both recycling and desalination. And overall, it presents a lower cost. Challenges, it's, as I mentioned at the outset, similar to the Marin Sonoma options, which it's closest to. It's not fully drought resistant in an extreme drought. And there is this perceived competition for winter water. So how would that integrated strategy perform compared to, compared to the baseline we see here in black? The integrated strategy, remember, includes a storage component. So it moves our maximum storage up from about 80,000 to 100,000, assuming that we can do that. And this is, if we were able to do that, this is how our system would perform. And you can see, even in this very extreme 4-year drought scenario of 2020, 2021, followed by 1976 and 1977, the reservoir storage system stays slightly above 40,000 acre feet. So very promising. But not only is it helpful just in the drought years, you know, in these intervening years, we don't dip into drought. We only hit a need for, you know, restrictions in terms of water use twice. And one of those times would be down to stage 2, and the other would be down to stage 3. So we feel it's a very robust roadmap, and we may not need all of the elements of it. But as I say, at the moment, we're pursuing all of the elements until we find out what some of the roadblocks might be. So looking here, right, at some of the improvements, generally at the district, when we're in normal years, our water supply is fine. But during 4-year droughts, our water system is going to experience shortages. In the future, we don't really know what, you know, the frequency exactly is going to be for droughts. What we do know, we're told about climate change, is that the droughts are going to be more severe and potentially longer. So longer periods between rainfall events. The actions that we have to address some of this, you know, we've described in some of these water management strategies for the roadmap. The robust portfolio in the strategy, in the integrated roadmap, it does diversify, and you can see the pie chart to the right here, where we look at how our diversification would occur if we're able to build out all the elements of the roadmap. And you can see local supply is still a significant piece, but it's far removed from the 75% that it is today. And we're a significant chunk from conservation, brackish desal, and potentially local storage augmentation. And similarly with Sonoma Marin. So it does provide a nice diversification there. And then we talked about benefits occurring in non-drought years. So we don't need to wait the 20 years between extreme drought events to have the benefit of increased diversification. And then implementation of the roadmap is going to require sustained investments. It's going to be requiring us to collaborate with our partners to the north, particularly. And importantly, we've seen some of the capital dollars associated with this are significant. So using and leveraging state and federal funding to bring those costs down will be a key step in implementation. So that's where we left off. The board selected the roadmap at the end of February, February 28th. And so since then, we've done a few things. There are some of the early action projects are already underway. For Sulahuli Pump Station, PG&E are undertaking a large load study. For the Phoenix to Bontempi option, we're analyzing the potential water quality impacts. And that's going to be a memo in-house. Stream release automation has kicked off. We've engaged a consultant to help us understand the benefits of installing an additional stream gauge out at Kent and Sulahuli to help us with that automation step. And then we'll be taking action and picking up some increased modeling activities around this optimization of supplemental water deliveries from Sonoma. Our water conservation activities are ramping up for this summer, and I mentioned the water conservation master plan is underway, and we should have that completed maybe late summer, early fall. In terms of local storage and the Sonoma options, those of course are large projects. We'll be using outside consultants to help us with those, and we're developing the scope of work for both of those projects. Brackish desalination near the Petaluma River. We'll be collaborating with Petaluma and North Marin to explore feasibility of those. In terms of moving and implementing these projects. We're currently in the process of a rate proposal. I think there's a rate hearing later in May. And as part of their proposed rates, they include funding for all of the water supply roadmap items that we've talked about. So all of these elements in here will be part of the rate package and will allow us to move forward with implementation steps for each of these projects. You can find more information about the rates on our website, and the address up here, marinwater.org/2023 rate setting. And there's some interesting items on there, including a rate calculator where you can go on and plug in some numbers and see how that's going to affect you personally. And that, I think, concludes my presentation for today, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Before we get to the Q&A, I just wanted to give an opportunity to Monty and Jed to add in anything they wanted. And also I wanted to let everyone know we're being joined by Ben Hornstein, who's the general manager of Marin Water. Ben has been our guest in the past for prior presentations, and we welcome him back. Welcome, good to see you again, Ben. And he'll be here to help us with the Q&A portion. So I can jump into that if the members of the panel would like to do that. On the other hand, if there are specific comments you'd like to make now at this point before we jump formally into the Q&A, that's fine too, but just let me know how you want to do it.
Sure. Scott, maybe we could just take a few moments to just quickly thank you and the Marin Coalition for hosting this event. You know, needless to say, we all of us who are joining here on the panel care greatly about our water, and we can't take enough time really to talk about it with other folks in our community to make sure that everybody understands just, you know, the work that we do. It's more than just turning on your tap and your water comes out. There's just so much that goes into it, and as we have been through extreme dry years, and now we are blessed with an abundance of water, we're aware that you know, we will be facing dry years in the future, potentially very soon. We don't know, but it's our job to be prepared. And so the work that we are talking about here today is about making sure that we are prepared so that we can continue to deliver water to people's taps. And so we just want to thank you for making the time and giving us a chance to meet with more of our community and answer questions.
That's great.
Thanks, Monty. You know, I'll reiterate the thank you, Scott, and to your group. I've been a long-term supporter and joined many Commonwealth Club events in San Francisco. I actually think my first introduction to this kind of forum was going to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park about 40 years ago, where people would stand up on a soapbox and people would gather around, and that kind of community engagement, this kind of community engagement, I think is critical to the democratic process and social discourse and transparency. And so I'm super appreciative that you are doing this and that we have several dozen people that have signed on and care. And we're here to serve. I personally am from Mill Valley, California. I serve Sausalito and, well, I served the whole district, but was elected by the group from Sausalito and Marin City and Mill Valley. And as I was going through my campaign last summer and last fall and have continued to this day, have really gone through a listening tour and trying to understand people's perspectives and their thoughts. And that kind of engagement has been enlightening for me. So every one of these kinds of events I'm learning, and that data gathering is critical for us to be able to make decisions, and we're in the throes of it right now. This is an organization that has not had a strategic plan since 2014. We have raising rates with an organization that's losing quite a bit of money every month right now. We have to get back on track in terms of providing water supply in ways that that we had a pretty scary event when the drought kicked in, and we almost ran out of water and had to do some emergency efforts about 18 months ago to invest money in a potential intertie to get water to our people. And so it got people nervous, and that nervousness and that anxiety is rooted in drought and the repercussions of climate change and the repercussions of how our community has had to shift its perspective and our personal decisions on how we think about water use. But it's more than water use. We're also responsible for land management and taking care of our trails and parks. So there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of decisions that we're in the throes of making right now. And so, Paul, I want to thank you for that overview and that update on the water supply roadmap. I think we're early, even though we just had a pretty significant study done by Jacobs. I would say there is not a clear decision set that has been made by the board. So this is truly a workshop, and we're in a directional mode. And so community feedback is critical right now. Still, most things are still on the table, and we're talking them through. And as a board member, I know I'm still trying to get more data behind all of these different options, and hopefully we'll increasingly dig into the feasibility of them and be able to help drive a resilient plan for the future. So thrilled to be able to engage any questions that we have here. Thank you.
Well, Jed, that's very well taken, all of your points, and we're delighted to have this conversation as well. I take your point that we're at a key moment in terms of the decisions that are being made, and to that end, I want to repeat what we heard a minute ago about the upcoming public hearing, and just let our listeners know that the public hearing is going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Tuesday, May 16, beginning at 6:30 p.m. It's going to be held at the Water Marin Boardroom at 220 Nellen Avenue in Puerto Madera. And members of the public will be able to either attend in person or on Zoom. There is a Zoom link. I won't read it to you, but it's at the marinwater.org website. And if you'd like to attend by Zoom and can't find it, we can help you, or Marin Water can obviously help you. And you can even attend by phone if you can't do Zoom. So I'm sure that our panelists today are looking forward to having public participation at that hearing on May 16. The other thing is that this program is recorded, and the presentation that Paul just gave us so expertly was a deep one, and those slides will be available on our website after this program, and the recording of the program will be available on our website as well. So if you or anyone you know in Marin that's interested in this issue wants to review this program again and do what I do, which is pause stuff to absorb it while you're watching it, that's open as an opportunity for you, because we record these, and so the program will live on our website for the duration. And there was a lot to absorb in that presentation, and I think it behooves a lot of us to take it in again, frankly. Let me move on to some of the questions. And first of all, I'm curious myself, as I was listening to the presentation. This is a roadmap that's been presented, and as Jed just suggested, decisions are still to be made as far as what the final strategies will be, how they'll be funded, and how they'll be implemented. So I guess the first question I would wonder is, when and how will Marin Water and your board decide which of those strategies to implement? How much are you anticipating the cost will be, and how will that be funded?
I might jump in really quickly just to say we already are implementing this roadmap. I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that the roadmap identified some things you could call low-hanging fruit, as a sort of layman's way of putting it. That these are projects that we already identified that are that provide the kind of benefits that we know we're going to want to include in our projects going forward. So there's in not that there isn't still some design and engineering and permitting work that needs to happen as part of implementing those things, but we're not just going to be doing further and further study on everything. We actually already will be getting started with those elements of the integrated strategy that focus on our ability to further leverage conservation outcomes, as well as greater flexible management of our existing infrastructure. Other projects that are included in the integrated strategy do take further design considerations. So if you're looking at, for example, the raising of an existing reservoir, that there's a lot of different elements that go into that. Some of it is just geotechnical engineering. Can the actual infrastructure in the current reservoir handle a raise or not? That's not something that we would have wanted to embark on until we decided that actually, should it be feasible, be worth the time and effort. Now that we have identified that it could provide a good yield of water for the cost, we now need to go to that next phase of investigation to make sure that our assumptions hold true before we make very, very substantial commitments in the tens of millions of dollars, which is kind of the prudent stepwise process in building these projects. But that next phase of feasibility analysis is underway now and is going to be something that we will be seeing the results of over time. I don't see that we will be waiting 2 years to come back and have this conversation again. I think that as we gather information along the way that tells us how feasible these different alternatives are, we will be making constant adjustments to stay focused on the things that will provide us the best results in the nearest amount of time for the best cost effectiveness.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add on to that. It's important to separate short, medium, and long-term projects here, and the short-term projects are critical, right? And so that will enable us to get access to thousands of acre feet of incremental water supply, both through electrification of Suluhuli as well as other water efficiency efforts that our community can engage in, and other infrastructure improvements. So those are happening now. As we get into the medium term and longer term, we're probably less clear, right? We're not at the point where we're ready to say investing in desal is the answer, raising the dams and increasing storage internally is the answer, or what the partnership with Sonoma would look like, or how we might engage in recycling and other DPR efforts with the ability to get water from our sanitary partners. Those are all going to take more time. So we're embarking on the beginning of the short-term efforts. They're critical so that we can make sure we don't have the emergency issues that we had 18 months ago. But as we get into the longer-term, larger ones, that's gonna take a little more time.
Okay, let me move on to, unless there were other comments, the audience questions that we have, and I'll try and run through these quickly. We have a number of them. So let's just jump in. Ann Becker is asking a couple of topics here. Can the capacity of our reservoirs be increased, and how quickly, if so? And secondly, her observation that a pipeline on the Richmond Bridge is not a good idea because pipelines flow both ways, and it could make it possible for other areas to make a claim on Marin Water. What are your thoughts on that? I'll throw it out to anyone who has a comment on it.
All probably yours.
I'll take a stab at it, and then you guys can color in. As far as the intertie and the pipeline going both ways, I guess I would just point out that Marin is small, and most folks on the other side of that pipeline are very large. So put it in context, the supply we're looking at bringing across that pipeline is probably less than the leakage rate for East Bay mud. Of water that just goes that way. There is no, so East Bay mud has a very strong water supply plan, and there would be no benefit to them to be thinking about bringing water from Marin into the East Bay Mud area. But it's an interesting thought. And then what was the other part of the question, Scott?
Asking about the capacity of reservoirs and if that could be.
Oh, yeah. So clearly, as we've been talking about this morning, raising storage is, capacity of our reservoirs is something that we're looking at. It's not something that you just start going out there and piling, dirt up on top of the reservoir. These tend to be fairly lengthy projects that are very, very well considered from a number of different angles, not the least of which Director Schmidt touched on in terms of geotech, but there's also cultural resources, there's rights of way, there's just it's a very complicated project.
Yeah, I just want to echo that in raising a dam, that there is the physical engineering aspect, which I think sometimes we think it's just a matter of engineering it correctly, and that may or may not be true to some extent. But there's cost feasibility. There are impacts. Some of the alternatives that we have looked at would inundate private property, and that's a consideration that needs to be looked at. There also are water rights. Our water rights are tied to our current water storage facilities and the rate and the timing and the volumes of what we store. So if we change that, we are opening potentially those water rights for further amendments and changes from the water board. And so that's another factor that we have to take into consideration and things that we need to learn more about as we consider this as one of our alternatives.
I'm just curious, and forgive me, I don't remember hearing about this in the presentation, but as far as increasing capacity of reservoirs, is deepening the reservoir itself an option?
So if you think of reservoirs typically as, a classic V shape, there's not a lot of volume at the bottom. So, if you were in Kent, for example, if you were to try to excavate Kent, it would take an awful lot of effort to do that. And we did look at excavating Nicasio, for example, and the costs are orders of magnitude higher than anything that we carried forward.
Interesting. Okay, let me move on. Tamala Fish has a question about desal. She observes that desalination can have terrible environmental consequences. How would those be dealt with if Marin Water moves forward with such a process? Where will the brine and wastewater be released? And will poor neighboring communities have the same rates as other communities? Not sure how that last part ties in.
Yeah, desalination, if it's not pursued thoughtfully, can of course have environmental impacts. Any project can. Our goal, of course, would be to be thoughtful about that, and there are different things that you can do to blend brine so that it's not as salty and doesn't have any. You're not introducing anything into the environment that's going to cause a problem. So I think thoughtful consideration over that and careful studies help us with that. As far as the rates, Scott, was that about whether everybody would be paying the same rates? Essentially,
I'm not 100% sure.
Well, typically the way we look at rates at the district is it's the cost of providing water to all of our customers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll just add, from everything that I've seen, including in the presentation you just showed, Paul, desal is probably one of the most expensive options that's on the table right now. I think there's significant headwinds for us in terms of upfront cost, ongoing operating cost, the significant amount of energy it takes to run a desal plant, which frankly makes climate adversity change worse. There's brine and other environmental impacts, and where exactly do we put it? So there's some serious headwinds, and it's probably the most controversial concept that we are engaged in. There's been 2 propositions voted by Marin residents and voters that restrict our ability to dig into it, and so I think it's our duty to review it, to analyze it, to see what the options are, because drought is part of our future. And even though it just rained and we may get all comfortable that it just rained, without a doubt, we need some long-term solutions. And so my current just high level opinion is that the idea of having desalination is probably inevitable. I just don't know whether it's 10 years or 50 years from now. From the costs that I'm seeing in front of us, I think it's going to be very difficult today, but given the enormity of water issues across the globe, I'm highly confident, especially coming from the tech industry, that there will be investments made that will make it better and more feasible in the future. And so it has to still be on the table.
And what about the
Yeah.
environmental impact? I don't know that the questioner obviously has asked about that, and you do hear about that.
Monty, were you going to go?
Well, I think, Scott, I was going to add to a little bit to what Jed just said, which is, you know, in order for us to, we have the ability under the propositions that Jed mentioned to be able to look and assess a desal plant that we can't construct. And so it's good that we're looking at it. I would agree with Jed that it's hard to imagine a future at some point where desal as a technology makes it cheaper and it's more efficient to run a system like that. It's hard to imagine that it wouldn't be somehow or another incorporated into water supply potentially. But you know, we're looking at it now because today there's an attraction to it. It's the idea that you flick on a switch in theory and you start getting water even in the driest of years, but it isn't that simple. And you know, and really, and a very important point for us is cost. We are, you know, when we look at all of the options, we are looking at the cost of that yield of that additional new acre foot of water that is water supply for our people. And we are driven to choose the most cost-effective means to do that because we are mindful that it does have an impact on all of our ratepayers and particularly for our low-income communities.
Yeah, and I'd say that, you know, at this point, and you know, this is something that Paul and Ben are working on actively. As a board, we have not decided how we are going to invest in each of these different areas in the short term. So we are looking at feasibility studies for desal. We're potentially looking at recycling, increasing storage. And we do have a $3 million, I think it was $3.1 million to further investigate some of these concepts. And I'm not sure exactly how that money is going to be allocated, but we're working on that now. So this is a live discussion in terms of how we will put our attention towards future feasibility work in each of these areas.
Very good. A specific question about West Marin here from Catherine Nicolini Jones. Can Marin Water provide West Marin with water when the agency is releasing excess water from its reservoirs? Point-raised water supplies are very limited. Can MMWD assist them in filling storage tanks and replenishing their underground water supply where there's excess?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. During the drought, our board accommodated requests from the ag community in West Marin to support them during the so severe, and the quantities for them were allowed them to maintain their business. For us, even during a drought, it was really, I think, fair to say de minimis quantity. So we do recognize we have had during the drought ongoing discussions with West Marin water agencies that are continuing. And as we develop these water supply projects, we will be discussing if there's interest to think about some of them as a regional concept and have them participate. And so far, it seems there will be some interest in that. So we do understand the situation out there, and it's part of our overall consideration.
Let me ask about a specific question concerning the flume, which I don't know much about personally. This is Ann Becker, who asks, conservation and water use restrictions. Why don't you require every home to install a flume? When we got a flume, it was an incredible revelation. Until then, we did not know how much water was used by our individual showers and individual toilet flushes. Now we can take specific actions and actually conserve, much better than trying to cut our use by a percentage. Any thoughts on a mandatory flume?
It's a great question, and it's really, my own experience was when I installed flume, I was away on vacation on the East Coast. I get an alert telling me that I have a leak back at home, and it turned out that it was like that the toilet flap had gotten stuck up, and it was just running and running and running. Would have never have known without a flume device. So information is power, and we see that, and we are looking at AMI, which is an automatic metering system that allows that same kind of information, and it happens at scale. And it better integrates with it's a technology that is being employed by many different water districts all around us. It ties also into our bill paying system, so that where flume would not. And so I think the question would maybe flume is not the right technology to put out onto the landscape, but we are looking at that same kind of information gathering, system, AMI, to be able to help people to have that real-time information about their water usage, because we know that it really does translate into greater awareness and greater conservation just by knowing how much water you're using. And then to be able to also identify leaks that are occurring not only in somebody's home, but elsewhere in our system. That helps us to be faster on repairs and make sure that we're not losing water unnecessarily when we have cracks or breaks in our system.
Good. We have a number of questions here, and it's a big topic. It's a somewhat controversial topic, so I'll throw it out with a question and then let everyone get into it. It's the rate increases that are being proposed, and there was a flyer or a mailing that went out recently from the agency that talked about proposed rate increases and gave a certain number of proposed increases in various tiers for various users and so forth. So let me read you one of the questions we have. This is from Josh Labresco. It's got several subparts, so bear with me, and then we'll open it up. The recent Marin Water booklet, Notice of Proposed Water Rate Fee and Charge Increases, proposes massive increases in water rates. Every part of the water bill would be significantly increased. Water use tiers would be adjusted to further increase rates, and there are even fee increases to fund the water board if we use less water. How is this justified? According to the booklet, part of this is for replacing aging infrastructure. But wouldn't an organization that has existed for many decades have a budget to cover maintenance and replacement of equipment? Next, part of this is to respond to climate change, but we've been in a phase of short water supply for many years, and weren't previous rate increases also justified for climate mitigation? And thirdly, part of this is to reduce wildfire risk, but didn't we recently approve a bond measure that funnels millions of dollars toward this need? Rate increases year after year with the same arguments. Rates increase year after year with the same arguments, and we pay more than any surrounding counties. Marin residents are frustrated. What is going on? Lots there, but I'm sure you've heard this before and have some comments on it.
Yeah, I think I can take a crack at it, chairing the finance committee. Rate increases are never popular, right? So you can understand why potentially historic boards may not have increased them as much as needed. Coming onto this board, it was blew my mind, frankly, that this organization has been losing $1 million per month for almost 2 years. And there was a good period of time in the late 90s and early 2000s where they did not raise rates sufficiently. And then there was no kind of drought-based rates in the recent time where conservation matters impacted our ability to in essence serve our customers and while the increase of supplying water went up. And then we got hit simultaneously with remarkable inflation, right? Inflation in our world for chemicals and for steel and for other items were even higher than other national costs. And so the impact of that financial situation that at least I came on board with is dire. It's significant. We have had 27 open positions that we have not been able to fulfill because we have not been able to afford them, it seems. We are only replacing 4 miles or so of pipe per year when our targets should be in the 8 to 10 miles of pipe replacement range. This is an old infrastructure that needs investment, and we have not had the cash to do that. So when you combine both inflation, maintenance needs, basic hiring needs to do our job, and the fact that we're losing so much money and dug into our reserves, I think we've used up the majority of our reserves in this period of time. We need to get back on track. And so there's a base level of rate increase just to get back to where we are, which in my mind is a slow degradation. And then now we're being asked for by our community, and rightfully so, to find more water supply, to find more ability to serve, to store, and or to invest in conservation and water efficiency matters, and take care of our trails. So there's a lot of investments that we need, including the last comment about Flume and AMI technology, in order to modernize Marin Water so that we can have the data to be able to save on leaks, to be able to understand the impact of people's decisions. So the enormous investments that are needed on top of just getting back to the base level is what we are being tasked to do. So this is not a frivolous organization. This is as scrappy an organization as I've been associated with, keeping it going and being thoughtful about not wasting our resources. And we're trying to get this back on track so that we can, at minimum, maintain the core level of need that our community deserves. And then to invest in the future to make this a leading organization and a leading company, or not company, but a leading agency to serve our public. And I think when we get through this, I'm hopeful that comments like the one that was asked in several years, that person will realize, and what I realize is that we're super lucky that we do have 75% of our water comes from our own storage, that we have a caring, thoughtful community that is leading in terms of conservation efforts, and that we can look back on this somewhat difficult time that drought has thrust upon us and be proud of the decisions that we're making right now.
I wanted to, if I could, just augment from a kind of a numbers perspective for folks that may want to understand that speak to the complexity of our water system. That's hard when you turn on the tap to really understand. The replacement value of our water, of the infrastructure, when you think about pipes in the ground, pump stations, tanks, is somewhere around $3 billion. And that's not including the 7 dams that nothing lasts forever and at some point, but just the hard infrastructure we have, absent dams, around $3 billion. And the average age is about 50 years. And the life expectancy, based on the materials used when they were put in, is about 70 years in total. So it's a very big challenge, and it's a very complex. The cost has gone up dramatically to just replace in construction. An example is a mile of pipe used to be on average $1 million a mile to replace pipe. Now it's about close to $3 million a mile. So we're faced with these, and this is a start. I think as we think about infrastructure generally in our society, bridges, roads, we at times see the grades that are put out by different organizations. You get a C here and a D- on bridges and all that. You know, this is the community's water system. And what the board is doing with this rate increase is investing for the community, for your water system, in a way that is I think very thoughtful and appropriate, but the challenge is there and it's going to be there for decades to come, I believe.
I'm just going to add in there because this is very, very important. And I know it's on the minds of a lot of folks as folks have just received the mailer. And other points I think are really important to recognize is that 95% of our costs are fixed. So whether we sell a lot of water or a little water, the cost is the same. And that's because, the cost of having people who are processing bills or who are checking meters, whether people buy a lot or a little, it still costs, we still have to have those same people out there doing those jobs. And so it's not like, and we totally understand the conundrum of how is it that I'm using less water, but yet my bill is still high. And it's just because this is the cost of what it is to provide service. That being said, our proposed rate increase is changing so that we are actually making the rate increase is less, significantly less for people who are using less water. We are trying to reward and incentivize people to use less water, and the changes we've made are helping to incentivize that. We are also, with this rate increase, we are really looking down the road, and we are tackling longstanding needs. And so in a way, we are putting ourselves on the kind of footing that will that'll help us to become the water district that we believe we all want, which is one that is financially well run, it is stable, that we are meeting our infrastructure repair needs and maintenance needs into the future, as well as building that water supply resilience. And so we've had to address, as Jed pointed out, a lot of changes in costs, where the cost of replacing a mile hasn't gone up 7% as we've seen in the news with inflation. We're talking several 100% increases for the materials we deal with in our business. So we know that these are impactful. We know that people no one's excited to receive an increase in their rates, but we want to assure people that these are being really well thought out, and that they are putting us on the kind of footing that we believe we must do in order to really truly serve our community and make sure we have a water agency that is that's going to be a water agency that will be there to provide water for future generations.
And just maybe 20 more seconds, Scott. I think it's important for our community to understand that we supply water for the majority of our community who live in single-family houses. That is spread out among in a wide area of land that is a hilly landscape, and it's very different than supplying water to industrial users or multi-unit large apartment complexes. And so because we live in this amazing place, and because we have this kind of water user, it is more expensive to deliver it. And with that said, we are very clearly regulated by the state to make sure that we are charging what it costs. So we're not here to make a lot of money. We actually have to prove that our rates meet the costs of serving our population, and that is what we're doing.
Very good. And I'll just remind the audience what we talked about earlier. There will be a public hearing on May 16 at 6:30 at the boardroom of Marin Water in Corte for anyone who would like to hear more. And I assume there will be an opportunity for public comment as well. We are at a time, and hopefully those that have additional questions can put those to our panelists at that meeting or in some other way, shape, or form. I kind of figured we wouldn't get to every question today, and I apologize to those whose questions I didn't have a chance to present to the speakers, but we did get a lot of information. I thought this was very informative. I'd like to thank our panelists for not just the time that you've put into the program today, but for the presentation's preparation, Paul's amazing slide deck with all the information that you gave us there. So thank you again to Monty Schmidt, Jed Smith, Paul Cillier, Ben Horenstein, all from Marin Water for this excellent presentation. This will be recorded and put on our website for those who didn't have an opportunity to see the whole thing. Share it with your friends, watch it again, just starting this discussion, obviously, and a lot more to be discussed. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to our panelists, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Alan Shavitz, board member and webmaster of